Welcome to or welcome back to the channel. Tonight we will be delving into 4 true crimes involving murders committed by stalkers. On average, annually, 3.4 million adults in the United States alone are victims of stalking. Our first case is that of Shauna Grice. Shauna Grice was a British teenager who was murdered by an ex-partner after he had stalked her. The murder led to criticism of Sussex police for their failure to take her complaints seriously. Shauna had met Michael Lane in 2015 when they had both worked at Brighton Fire Alarms. Lane was from Thornhill Rise, Portslade, near Brighton. They formed a relationship during the break between Shauna and her high school sweetheart, Ashley Cook. Lane became obsessed with her. He refused to accept the breakup and said to a friend, "She'll pay for what she's done." Lane stalked Shauna after she broke up with him and returned to Cook. Lane put a tracker device on her car, which notified him via his mobile phone every time her vehicle moved. In February of 2016, Shauna complained to police about being stalked by Lane after receiving unwanted flowers and damage to her vehicle. In March of that year, Lane snatched her phone and grabbed her hair. He was arrested on suspicion of assault, but later released, and Grice was issued with a fixed penalty notice by police for wasting their time by not disclosing that she had been in a relationship with him. In early July of 2016, Lane used a stolen key to let himself into her home and watch her while she apparently was sleeping. She was actually awake, had heard his footsteps, and hid under the duvet cover. She heard a man breathing in her room. Shortly afterwards, the man left, and when Shauna looked out her window, she saw Lane walking away. He was arrested for theft, given a police caution, and told to stay away from Shauna. The following day, July 10th of 2016, she received around 7 phone calls from a blocked number, including one with heavy breathing. She was told there were no further lines of inquiry and the case would be left on file. 2 days later, she reported to police that she was being followed by Lane. Police treated the case as low risk, but that the investigating officer would be made aware. On August 4th of 2016, Shauna saw Lane loitering outside her home. She confided in her friend Joanne Pumphrey that she was afraid that police wouldn't believe her because of her previous fine for wasting police time. Although Joanne was a witness to this, Shauna did not report the incident to police. On August 25th of 2016, Lane waited until Shauna was alone at home, then let himself in, slit her throat, and set fire to her bedroom with her in it. She was 19 years old at the time of her murder, and her killer was 27 years old. Her body was found by Ian Cook, her boyfriend's father, in her home. 2017 at Lewis Crown Court and lasted 2 weeks. Lane admitted to stalking Shauna but pleaded not guilty to murdering her. After being found guilty, Lane was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. Shauna's parents, Sharon and Richard, said their daughter would still be alive if Sussex police had acted on her complaints. The judge, Justice Green, also criticized police. During sentencing, he said, there was seemingly no appreciation on the part of those investigating that a young woman in a sexual relationship with a man could at one and the same time be vulnerable and at risk of serious harm. The police jumped to conclusions, and Shauna was stereotyped. Sussex police also revealed that Lane had been the subject of complaints of stalking and harassment from 13 other women. Most of the complaints related to the 3 years leading to Shauna's murder, except for one which allegedly occurred within the preceding 10 years. A domestic homicide review report concluded that Lane had harassed 12 girls and young women between 2006 and 2016, and he had been arrested over claims he groomed a 14-year-old girl. He was not charged over the 2010 grooming allegation, which was marked on his arrest record, but it was not noted when Shauna reported him for harassment. The allegation dates to when he was a volunteer scout leader. After his arrest, he resigned from the Scouts. He was told the allegation would be considered if he tried to rejoin the organization, but when he did so in 2015, he was not recognized as a past member, and he volunteered for several months. The failure to recognize him was put down to a temporary glitch in the IT system. The report said that Lane had used youth movements, which appealed to young women and girls, to allow him access to his victims. The report also mentioned an account of Lane being very controlling in another relationship, of him bombarding women with explicit messages, loitering outside their homes, pestering women to sleep with him for money, harassing 2 women he met in a pub, and sexually assaulting another woman. In August of 2019, it was announced that Sussex police would no longer fine people reporting domestic abuse for wasting police time. That absolutely floors me, that any woman or man that is in fear for their safety and tries to utilize law enforcement to help them is fined monetarily for wasting the police's time. I digress. Sussex police apologized to Shauna's parents and referred themselves to an independent police complaints commission, which launched an inquiry. In late April 2017, Sussex police accepted 6 recommendations from the IPCC to improve the way the force dealt with stalking. The recommendations concerned training, data systems, and making use of relevant information. IPCC Associate Commissioner Tom Milsom said that Sussex police had taken a positive response to the recommendations, and he said that stalking harassment are serious offenses, and in certain situations, such as those involving Shauna, can have tragic consequences. Detective Superintendent Jason Dingley of Sussex Police said that additional training was already being provided, and we have improved our understanding of what stalking and harassment is and what our response should be. People, this was less than a decade ago. Unbelievable. In April of 2019, a report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services concluded that stalking and harassment offenses were not being properly investigated by Sussex Police. The report said that a training program introduced after Shauna's murder to help staff understand and identify stalking was never fully completed. Most investigating officers had received no training. Not enough victims were being referred to support services, and there was concern over online stalking. Police forces nationally were not using powers under stalking laws to search suspects' homes, which made investigations less thorough. Injunctions were not being used, so victims were not being properly protected. The National Police Chiefs Council was called on to make sure police forces around the UK made improvements and that a single definition of stalking be adopted by police forces and government departments. In April of 2019, it was announced that 3 police officers would face disciplinary action the following May. 2 officers, 1 retired, faced gross misconduct proceedings, whilst another officer was accused of misconduct. PC John Barry Mills resigned from the police before a disciplinary hearing on May 10th of 2019. One allegation against Mills is that he failed to adequately investigate allegations of harassment and stalking. This relates to July 9th, 2016, when Shauna complained Lane had stolen her back door key, crept into her bedroom, and watched her sleeping. Shauna made a further complaint on the 12th of July that Lane had been following her in his car, but PC Mills failed to contact Shauna or update her regarding the reported incident. She was not called back, and a few days later received a letter stating that the case was closed. Friends said she was angry and could not believe the police had dropped the case and had not reported further instances of stalking as a result. It was the last time she contacted police before Lane murdered her in August. When questioning, PC Mills said he was alarmed by some of Lane's behavior and admitted that his failure to properly question him was an oversight. PC Mills' first name was initially not released in an attempt by lawyers to conceal his identity. The Independent Officer for Police Conduct, which was formed in 2018 and took over some of the IPCC's functions, stated, "Resigning from the force does not preclude officers from facing misconduct hearings." A force disciplinary panel ruled that PC Mills' failings amounted to gross misconduct and that he had not resigned. If he had not resigned, he would have been dismissed from the police force. Former PC Trevor Godfrey was found by a disciplinary panel Our second case is that of Carrie Farver. In November 2012, Shanna Liz Gollier murdered Carrie Farver, then spent the next 3 years pretending to be her while sending tens of thousands of texts and emails to their shared love interest. The murder of Carrie Farver is one of the most chilling and bizarre true crime cases in modern American history. The 37-year-old woman from Iowa started a whirlwind romance with Dave Krupa of Omaha, Nebraska in October of 2012. And 2 weeks later, she vanished, never to be seen again. Dave Krupa, however, had nothing to do with her mysterious disappearance. Carrie Farver was abducted and murdered by Liz Gollier, a woman Krupa had been casually dating before he met Carrie. For the next 3 years, Liz Gollier posed as Carrie, sending thousands of text messages and emails to Krupa and Carrie's family members. She even sent threatening messages to herself so that Krupa wouldn't catch on to her act. Because the texts and emails were coming from Carrie Farver's accounts, it wasn't until 2015 that authorities really started looking into her disappearance. As they began investigating Gollier, they learned the entire ruse went much deeper than anyone could have ever imagined. In 2012, Dave Krupa was working at an auto repair shop in Omaha, Nebraska. At the time, he was hoping for a fresh start in life. He had just split up with his longtime girlfriend, Amy Flora, with whom he shared 2 children. He soon decided to sign up for an online dating service where he met Liz Gollier. The two began seeing each other, but before things could get too deep, Krupa reportedly informed her that he wasn't looking for anything serious. Liz, a single mother, was happy with that arrangement, or so she claimed. Several months after meeting Liz, Krupa spotted Carrie when she walked into his shop. I'm sorry guys, it's been a long day. Thank you for bearing with me. He immediately knew there was something special about her. When we looked at each other, there was a little spark, he later told ABC News. She's showing me something inside the vehicle and we're standing there and we're very close, and there was definitely some tension. Krupa asked Carrie out on a date where they discussed that neither of them was looking for an exclusive relationship. The two returned to his apartment, and as Carrie was leaving later, she passed a woman in the hallway. It was Liz, who had dropped by unannounced to pick up some of her things. It was this chance meeting, a meeting that couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, that would change the course of both women's lives. Within weeks of meeting Carrie, Dave Krupa was beginning to rethink his commitment to bachelorhood. Carrie still wanted to keep things casual, but she did agree to stay with him for a few nights in November of 2012. She was working on a major project for her job, and Krupa's apartment was much closer to her office than her home was. The last time anyone saw Carrie alive was November 13th of 2012. She'd spent the night with Krupa and gave her a kiss as she left for work, but she never returned. A few hours later, however, Krupa received an odd text from Carrie. She told him she wanted to officially move in with him. just discussed keeping things casual. He politely declined, and he received an angry message in response. He recalled to Oxygen's Dateline secrets uncovered. As soon as I text her back, I get a text back that says, "Fine, I don't ever want to see you again. Go away, I'm dating somebody else. I hate you," and on and on. Carrie's family started receiving texts as well. Her mother, Nancy, got a message from Carrie saying she had moved to Kansas for a new job and would get in touch to make arrangements about picking up her 15-year-old son, Max. Nancy thought this was strange, but when Carrie missed her half-brother's wedding and her father's funeral, she knew something was dreadfully wrong. Authorities reportedly tried to get in touch with Carrie, but when they received messages from her number asking them to leave her alone, they dropped it. Her mother also told them that Carrie had previously been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so investigators assumed she'd stopped taking her medication and vanished on her own accord. It would be years before they realized how wrong they were. On August 17th of 2013, Liz called Dave Krupa in a panic. For months, the two had bonded over the threatening messages they were both receiving from Carrie, but now things had seemingly escalated. Liz said her house had been set ablaze and her beloved pets had perished in the fire. Krupa soon received a text from Carrie's number that read, "I am not lying. I set that nasty whore's house on fire. I hope the whore and her kids die in it." Krupa also started receiving texts outlining exactly what he was doing or what he was wearing at the moment. Some of these messages would come in while he was in the same room as Liz and could see that she wasn't using her phone at that time, so he had no reason to suspect she was behind them. When he changed his phone number, the messages abated for a while. In February of 2015, he moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and he stopped spending as much time with Liz. It was around this same time that detectives finally began digging deeper into Carrie's odd disappearance. In the spring of 2015, detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Dottie of the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office in Council Bluffs started a full-blown investigation into Carrie's whereabouts. They suspected she was dead, but they weren't sure when or how ordeal. I want Liz to go away and never do this to anybody again. Nancy and Carrie's son were foremost in my mind. They're unfortunately the ones that will have to live with the repercussions. I know I say this in every video, but people are wild. I have no idea where these people come up with this absolute craziness. But alright, case number 3. This is the case of Gracie Spinks. The parents of Gracie Spinks have said the police response to their daughter's stalking case was diabolical, as they called for a national change and more funding for stalking advocates and forces to protect future victims. An inquest jury concluded on Thursday. This was in November of 2023, by the way, that Gracie was unlawfully killed by a man she had reported for stalking after Derbyshire police admitted a number of failings in the handling of her case. A 3-week inquest into her death heard that Michael Sellers, 35, who met 23-year-old Gracie through work and became obsessed with her, had previously harassed at least 8 other women. Gracie reported his behavior to the police 4 months before her murder in June of 2021. Officers cautioned him but did not request information from his employer about complaints against him or carry out a national database check, and categorized him as low risk. They also failed to investigate a bag of weapons found near the field in Duckmanton, Derbyshire, where Gracie was killed while tending to her horse 6 weeks before her death, with one officer telling the inquest she thought they could be theater props. A rucksack containing a number of knives, an axe, a hammer, Viagra, a handwritten note that said, "Do not lie," as well as a receipt that could be traced to Sellers, were logged as lost property by the force. The 10 members of the inquest jury, who wore pink and purple wristbands in Gracie's memory, concluded she was unlawfully killed by Sellers. Yeah, I guess so. Multiple failings by Derbyshire police, which the force has admitted, were referred to in the record of inquest, but the jury was prevented by a coroner from deciding whether the failings had contributed to Gracie's death. Gracie's mother, Allison Ward, and father, Richard Spinks, said the inquest had exposed a diabolical response from Derbyshire police. Her father said, "It has been upsetting and emotionally draining. It has been a catalog of errors on the police's part. I think Derbyshire police have let Gracie down big time. It seems like they weren't bothered. They didn't want to investigate. They completely failed to join the dots." Her mother said, "We thought she would be safeguarded, that things would be put in place, that she would be safe. But that's not been the case at all. It's basic policing where they've failed." The inquest has shown us that victims of stalking don't actually always realize the level of risk they are exposed to. You look to the police for support because they are supposedly trained in this, but they just completely failed. In an emotional statement read during the inquest, her mother described how the heart of the family had been ripped out after Gracie's murder. She said Gracie was the life, soul, and energy of the house. She would always be singing, playing music, and having fun with us all. We would very often have karaoke nights in our when Sellers attacked her before taking his own life nearby. Gracie's towel was on the radiator as she left it on the Thursday night. Her bed is not made, and a plate and packet of empty crisps lay on her bedside cabinet. Her water cup is on the windowsill, and her handbag is where she left it, and her clothes remain on the floor. I cannot bear to touch anything. Gracie was pursuing a career as a swimming teacher before she was furloughed in 2020 and took a temporary job at a local e-commerce company, Xbite, where Sellers worked as her supervisor. The pair met a few times outside of work, but when Gracie told him she no longer wanted this to continue, he refused to accept her decision and would bombard colleagues with questions about her. It was after Gracie found him waiting for her at the field where she kept her horse that she reported him to her employer, and Sellers was subsequently dismissed for gross misconduct. Gracie then reported Sellers to Derbyshire police, saying during a 101 call, "I'm just worried that the next time it happens to someone else, it could be worse. He might kidnap someone." The inquest heard police had uncovered evidence that Sellers had harassed at least 8 other women he met through work, with some reporting that they had to quit their job and move house to avoid him. One woman said Sellers had bumped his car into hers at a roundabout as he followed her while she was driving home. Gracie's family said they would keep campaigning for more resources and training for police officers to ensure stalking cases are thoroughly investigated. "We want to bring a change across the UK and to put funding in place for advocates in police forces that can deal with stalking cases specifically," said Ward. "We didn't realize how big a problem this was until what happened to Gracie." An investigation by the Independent Office for Police Conduct found failings and missed investigative opportunities from the force, and 2 constables were found to have breached standards of professional behavior and received written warnings. Reading a statement outside court on behalf of Derbyshire Police, Detective Superintendent Darren Diath said, "Put simply, as a force, we failed Gracie, and for that I can only offer my own and the force's most sincere apologies. We have now heard the conclusion of the jury and we accept this fully. We await any further recommendations that may come from the coroner and will review these in due course." He said that in response to Gracie's death, the force had made significant changes to the ways in which we receive and investigate stalking reports, as well as how we support and safeguard victims of these crimes. However, none of this seeks to minimize the failings that we have seen in this case, and the force fully Vera also received phone calls from a man who claimed to have Scott or to have killed her. None of the calls could be traced, however, because the caller would not stay on the line long enough. In August of 1984, partial remains were found and later identified as Scott's. No arrests have been made in her case. Dorothy Scott was a single mother living in Stanton, California with her aunt and 4-year-old son. She was a secretary for 2 jointly owned Anaheim stores, one that sold psychedelic items, an example, love beads and lava lamps, and the other, a head shop. If you guys don't know what a head shop is, it's like a smoke shop. So she was working in 2 little hippie stores in Anaheim. Co-workers and friends said she preferred staying at home, was a devout Christian, and did not drink or do drugs. Her parents, who lived in Anaheim, babysat their grandson while she worked. Her father, Jacob, said his daughter may have dated on occasion, but had no steady boyfriend as far as the family knew. Months before her abduction, Scott had been receiving strange phone calls at work from an unidentified male. The caller alternately professed his love for her and his intent to kill her. Scott's mother recounted, one day he called and said, "Go outside," because he had something for her. She went out and there was a single dead red rose on the windshield of her car. Scott's mother said one call especially horrified her daughter. The man reportedly told Scott he would get her alone and cut her up into bits so that no one would ever find her. Because of the calls, Scott began considering the purchase of a handgun. About a week before her disappearance, she had also started taking karate lessons. At 9 p.m. on May 28th of 1980, Scott was at an employee meeting at work. She noted co-worker Conrad Bostron did not look well and he had a red mark on his arm. She and another co-worker, Pam Head, left the employee meeting to take Bostron to the emergency room at UC Irvine Medical Center. On the way to the hospital, they stopped by Scott's parents' house to check on her son. She also changed her black scarf to a red one. At the hospital, medical personnel determined Bostrom had suffered a black widow spider bite and treated him. Head said she and Scott remained in the ER waiting room. At no time, Head said, did Scott leave her side. Bostrom was discharged around 11 p.m. and given a prescription. Scott offered to bring her car to the exit. She did not want him to walk too far in his condition, as he said he was still not feeling well. Head said that Scott used the restroom before briefly heading out to the parking lot. Head and Bostrom filled his prescription and waited at the exit for Scott. When they did not see her after a few minutes, they went out to the ER's parking lot. Suddenly they saw Scott's car speeding toward them, its headlights blinding them so they could not see who was behind the wheel. They waved their arms to try to get Scott's attention, but the car sped past them and took a sharp right turn out of the parking lot. Initially, both thought that Scott had an emergency that had come up with her son. A few hours later, after not hearing from her, Head and Bostrom reported Scott missing at about 4:30 a.m. Scott's car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, was found burning in an alley hospital. Neither she nor the supposed kidnapper were anywhere nearby. On August 6th of 1984, a construction worker discovered dog and human bones side by side about 30 feet from Santa Ana Canyon Road. The bones were partly charred, and authorities believed they had been there for 2 years, as a bushfire had swept across the site in 1982. A turquoise ring and watch were also found. Scott's mother said the watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, about an hour after Head and Bostrom last saw Scott's vehicle. On August 14th, the bones were identified as Scott's by dental records. An autopsy could not determine the cause of death. A memorial service was held on August 22nd of that year. About a week after Scott's disappearance, her parents received a phone call from an unidentified man who said, "I've got her," and hung up. The same man called almost every Wednesday afternoon and said either that he had Dorothy or he had killed her. The calls were usually brief and usually occurred when Vera, her mother, was home alone. In April of 1984, the man called during the evening, and Jacob Scott answered, and the calls stopped. After Scott's remains were found in August of 1984, the family started receiving calls again. Police installed a voice recorder at the Scott residence. They were not able to trace the calls, however, because the man never stayed on the line long enough. A possible motivation in Scott's murder surfaced June 12, 1980. An unidentified man called the front desk at the Orange County Register, which had run a story that day about the case. A managing editor told police, the man said, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else, and I killed her." The editor also said the caller knew Conrad Bostrom had suffered from a spider bite the night of May 28th. He also knew that Scott had been wearing a red scarf. She had changed her black scarf to a red one after the employee meeting. Neither of these details had been published in the June 12th article. The caller also claimed Scott phoned him from the hospital that night. Pam Head disputed that claim, saying she had been with Scott the entire time and she had not made any phone calls. Investigators believe the anonymous caller was responsible for Dorothy Scott's death. Of course, not all stalking cases end in murder, but a lot of stalking cases end in, violent physical altercations. And for a lot of people involved in these kinds of situations, it may be hard for them to find resources or help. I have 2 phone numbers. If you know of anyone that suffers from stalking or domestic violence and needs help, you can call Victim Connect at 855-484-2846 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. The highest compliment you can pay to the channel is a thumbs up or subscribe. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I look forward to seeing